Tales of the Cocktails Healthy Pour series, where we're here to talk a little bit about, mental health through psychoeducation and conversation, I guess. So my name is Laura Green. A few things about the functionality of the platform that we're on. If you look on your right-hand side, there is a chat. That is where you all are able to leave comments and chat with each other. Under questions, if you have a question for us, please put your question there. This just helps us to not miss any questions. If you post questions in the chat, it just kind of scrolls pretty quick, and we don't want to miss anything. Yep, there's a chat. Welcome. Under polls, you're going to see a few polls come through asking about kind of how you're feeling and what you do in the industry. This is really helpful for us to check in with you to make sure that, folks are in a good place and we're on the right track in terms of what we're talking about. And then if you want to see who's on, you can see that under people, which is pretty great. Great. So awesome. Hi. So a little bit about Healthy Pour in this series and what it is. This is essentially what we would call like psychoeducation. So we are speaking about, processes and mechanisms and experiences that we might have with our emotional life, with our mental health, within the context of being in the hospitality industry and during this quarantine restaurant closure time and what that looks like. This is not therapy, and this is not a replacement for therapy. However, I am a licensed professional. I am a licensed professional counselor, and the guests that we have on this webinar series are also licensed professionals in the mental health field. So again, this is not therapy, and this is not a replacement for therapy. If you find that any of this is a little bit too much for you, some of the content that we will be talking about might make you feel some things, which is totally okay. Feelings are our friends. They're indicators of what our experiences are. If you need some resources, go to healthypour.org/if you need help. Oh, I think that's it. I hope that's the right one. Just click it to make sure. Oh, I already messed it up. It's if you need help with the dashes in there. Lola, can you help me? I'm sorry. Or I can do this too. Anyway, so there are resources there for you, places where you can find hotlines and resources to find therapists on sliding scales and stuff like that. So yeah, if you do feel some things, that's okay. Just acknowledge that they're happening to you and that you are feeling them. And if you do have to leave, thank you Tales team. That is the website that I made. Yeah. If you do have to leave, there's no judgment there. You need to do what's right for you. And at the end of the day, we just want this to be helpful for you. So yeah, let's get started. Just if this is your first time here, quick introduction of who I am. My name is Laura Green. Again, like I said, I am a licensed professional counselor. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I do work in the industry, and I have for a long time. Right now, I am the spirit specialist for wine in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And in my copious amounts of spare time, I have this little company called Healthy Pour, where I conduct research. I help bars and restaurants kind of wrap their head around how they can help their employees, thrive and live healthier lives. I work with nonprofits on educational systems, and that just keeps growing and growing. And this awesome and hopefully helpful webinar series. And with me today, I was going to say, not in the flesh. None of us are in the flesh.
Only, yeah, close though.
I have Kelly Pastori, which is really awesome. Kelly, if you could introduce yourself and tell everybody about who you are and your connection with the industry.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Laura. I'm Kelly. I currently, as of about 3 weeks ago, weird time to move, reside in Austin, Texas, but I was living in Chicago for about 2.5 years prior to this. I am also a mental health therapist. Went to school in Seattle, kind of have bopped around all over the country, but I'm from Florida originally. I am a licensed counselor. Also, I love working in the service industry. So I've been in the industry probably 8 years or so at this point. Everything baristing to I lived in Oaxaca last winter doing mezcal. So I kind of have a lot of little realms of things I love to be in. And so I've have a very strong connection to the industry. Not quite a minute yet down here in Austin, but we'll see. So I'm also a restorative yoga teacher. And so I do a lot of that work on the side. And I have a photography business as well, working with body positive photography. So I do a lot of little things, and that's how I find that I can cope and survive kind of well within all of those realms. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Cool. I didn't know about the photography. That's really
cool. Yeah. It didn't amp up, I guess, in Chicago very much as I would have liked to. But yeah, it started out in Seattle. Yeah.
So, well, cool. So today we are going to discuss a little bit about anxiety and depression. Last week we talked about coping skills and substance use. The idea behind that being that, a lot of people are, this is all very new for all of us, and needing some immediate tools and coping skills, and talking about that and what those processes look like, I think are important. But, talking about anxiety and depression, especially as we, embark on 30 days into this experience, I think is really important. And something I realized too is, certainly there's a lot of stigmas around talking about mental health, but I think that there's a lot of myths as well talking about mental health, and kind of understanding first and foremost, like what mental health is and what we are talking about when we talk about mental health. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to kind of get us started on, what it is mental health is.
Sure. Yeah, I can start there. Gosh, I mean, that can be such an encompassing question, right? I mean, it's a really layered question. It's not necessarily mental health, I think, personally, can look like how our psychological and physical state of being kind of exists in the world, whether we're prepped to kind of deal with the daily life stressors due to just our normal lives. I mean, we live really fast American busy lives. And so I think that mental health is kind of our stamina, our moment of stamina, and trying to help us to see if we can regulate ourselves or not, really, in a lot of ways. I like to think about the brain kind of like I like to think about the body, and that if we leave our body stagnant, our muscles close up, the fascia around our muscles kind of starts to harden. We can't move as easily, kind of similar to our brains, where if we are not giving our brains exercise and health and movement, then we're gonna start getting in these patterns that are really can become unhealthy, not necessarily inherently unhealthy, but they can become unhealthy over time, I think, if we don't check in with ourselves. That's kind of where I go. I'm not sure about you, Laura, but that's when I think about mental health, I think about it like the rest of the muscles in the brain, kind of like the body. I mean, kind of like the body.
Sure. And it's, someone asked me just recently what it was, and I think I gave what felt like a 15-minute explanation of what mental health is. Yeah. I think of it as like the relationship of the self and the emotional life of the self with the perception of the world around the self, so like it includes, I mean, and you're totally right with the layers, because it includes our interpersonal relationships, our relationships with our friends, our partners, our families, people who we run into on the street, as well as like larger social systems. Everything impacts our mental health, and our mental health is everything, including our physical health. And everything is intertwined and layered. And I think that's what makes this work really fun and also challenging at times.
Super. Yeah.
But I think when people think about mental health, and, folks in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes I get the sense that people think immediately that we're talking about the most severe challenges, that when we talk about mental health, it's all about like, manic disorders and, these like big, the biggest examples, and I would say, I try not to do the whole like physical versus mental health, but as of right now, it's kind of the most, the easiest and most parallel way to really talk about stuff is if we talked about physical health and only talked about cancer or aneurysms or, you know, whatever. But mental health, just like our physical health, can be a backache, you know, or, you know, a bout of sadness, or, you know, it's everything big and everything as small as can be, and then all of that in between.
Yeah.
And just like our physical health, if we leave things to go and we ignore them, they can sometimes turn into bigger things too. Which I think is a nice segue in talking about anxiety.
Totally. I know. I was just going to add to that. Yeah, totally. And I decided to let you see that come.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about anxiety, Kelly?
Sure. Yeah. Like, just like you're talking about, I love that idea that it is just like a backache. It's just, anxiety is actually meant to be good. You know, it's meant to be a kind of warning sign that something is off. It's really just our body's natural response to something stressful, like a feeling of fear, apprehension of what's to come. Kind of like, I like to think of anxiety as fear, and I mean, not to talk about depression yet, but depression, anxiety is fear of the future, and kind of depression, this idea of a fear of the past. So kind of things that stick with us over time. Anxiety is more of like, I will not be, I won't have enough. I won't be enough. I can't, you know, that kind of that fear of future stability, I guess, in some way. Yeah, it shows, I mean, to me, it shows up all the time in my life as like trying to people please, trying to be around people all the time, not wanting to be alone, feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes we can add drinking in there, shopping, being busy, having a hard time slowing down. I notice this in my body. I like will sigh really largely or heavily, or long sighs, you know, not being willing to say no for things because we're afraid either someone will be mad at us, or anxiety shows up in just so many ways. I think it's kind of stigmatized to be this idea that only people with anxiety disorder have anxiety. And I think that's really not the case. It can show up when in the service industry, I feel it all the time. It's like anxiety kind of pushes the service forward in some ways. You have to be on, you've got to be going. And a lot of times it's just hard to come down from that. And so we kind of get stuck in this cycle where we're constantly stressed and anxious, and we don't know how to come down because it's not our natural layer anymore.
I think you brought up just so many good points in there, because anxiety, there can be such a sweetness to anxiety. Like you mentioned that we talked a little bit the other day, you and I, about yoga. And when you talk about anxiety kind of being a friend and that it's like, it can be a positive thing. It makes me think of that point in yoga when you're stretching and you find that balance between the stretch and strength. And there's that sort of sweet pain that happens from that when you're living in that. That to me can also be how anxiety feels. Like, you know, like I was talking with my brother once, and he's like, "How are you feeling?" I'm like, "I'm really anxious, but like in the best way, because, you know, things are happening and the future is coming and all of this stuff." I think when anxiety becomes debilitating, is when you can't be in this present moment and you're only thinking about what's happening in the future. And often we see that in a catastrophizing way of like, I'm afraid of the future. I'm afraid of what's going to happen. All of these, you know, that it's a bad thing. And then we're taking ourselves out of that current moment. Yeah. Just checking in with folks. I'm seeing we're at about heavily at a 3 in terms of anxiety right now. Is this helpful so far? You know, it takes a minute to come through, but it is helpful to understand anxiety. And when anxiety, great info, awesome. So like Kelly said, Kelly mentioned anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorder is like, we're talking about like generalized anxiety or other kinds of anxiety disorders, that the anxiety becomes so overwhelming that someone has a hard time functioning normally within their daily life, or it's impeding on their everyday relationships, or impeding on their ability to, you know, be happy and thrive. That's when it starts to become a challenge, when it stops being able to live your life fully.
Yeah, that makes me think a lot about just the sympathetic nervous system, and how there was a really interesting book in grad school I read that was called "Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers." I don't know if you've heard that before, but it's a really interesting book. That helps kind of helps us understand the hormones in our bodies that are released during kind of a stressful, anxious moment, right? So like, say you're a zebra getting chased out in the bush by a lion, right? Like that's good anxiety. If that anxiety wasn't there, you'd not be running from that tiger or that lion. But the problem is, so usually in that moment, a tiger, or I mean, sorry, I'm getting animals confused. The zebra would get back home and kind of like get connected to its group of family and people, and it'd kind of chill out and kind of shake itself out. It would feel safe and then go shake its body, right? So that is kind of having it complete this stress cycle of stress within the body, so that it let its anxiety and kind of pushes itself out of the sympathetic nervous system, which is like this working anxious mode, because it's pushing your cortisol, adrenaline, all these different hormones that are reacting to your body to tell you to run away. And the problem with we're mammals too, and evolutionarily, we haven't really figured out what to do with that, right? We encounter stress all the time. You can be in stress in a traffic jam, and that will literally stay with you. It'll take 10 seconds to happen, and then your body is aroused in those stress levels for 4, 5, 6 hours. So just even as humans in general, have a hard time processing anxiety. So they say oftentimes, like, a lot of indigenous cultures dance, right? A lot of those cultures have huge senses of resilience, just within trauma and within stress and anxiety. And so there's a reason that our bodies need to move, and our brains need to move in order to get our stress through our body. Think about how much stress we have in service industry. Oh my gosh, like that whole, it's really hard. And then, I mean, to finish this shift off with a drink, and, it's just like it's a really different way of dealing with stress than what our body naturally is kind of meant to do with stress. So therefore we run the risk of having longer term anxiety issues. And if it just keeps going, and we don't let the stress complete the cycle.
That's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm totally going to pick up that book because it makes sense. Like when you have a stress response, and we talked a bunch about stress, I think last time, when you have a stress response, right, and your energy rises and you become hypervigilant, you start, you mentioned cortisol, adrenaline, all of these, physical symptoms, physical happenings in my brain.
Yeah.
All of these things happen to you physically that literally produce energy so that you can get away. So then if you don't have anywhere to put that,
right.
And it makes sense then if you use something like alcohol to numb that, which is a depressive, you're not actually getting out. You're just going,
right. And then we are tired and sluggish the next day. It just is like, it's a cycle that I've been caught in easily. Other people, we all just, I think it's a very complicated cycle. So, even something that helps me sometimes is like taking a bath after work, even though it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, getting in the bathtub and just like chilling out, lighting a candle, like incense or something, and not to mention that's that's, you and I are white privileged women. So I think that there's another layer of that, of like racial oppression, other gender oppression. All the things that people were already living with in some ways. There's just layers of it. It's systemic. So I think that that's 100%. Something to mention as well. There's layers of this kind of stuff. It's stuff that's been operating within bodies for years and years and years. And we carry generational stress and all of that too.
Like generational trauma, like epigenetics, I think is what it's called. And those are, for folks tuning in, like epigenetics is when essentially trauma and stress are stored within DNA. And it's like a sort of evolutionary function that happens, like, if you look at it the most basic way of like, someone eats a poison berry or something that's supposed to like innately come into our DNA to warn the next generations of like, this berry is not delicious, don't eat it. So when there is massive generational trauma, be it from something like the Holocaust, slavery, and multiple generations of trauma beyond that, that starts to be stored in the body, and we see it playing out in other ways very much within mental health, certainly. But epigenetics, generational trauma, all of that. Radical Exchange does a lot of really cool work on that within the hospitality industry. So if you want further reading on that or further learning, I would definitely get in on that. So we talked a little bit about, so that's good, because if we talk about coping with anxiety, like in the moment, I think it's important then to acknowledge that you're feeling anxious, and then find ways for yourself to sort of get that anxiety out once the stressor or the threat has passed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it.
And then like, and it can be like moving, that can be like shaking, like literally like
dancing, moving, running. I tend to think that the research that is on, I mean, there's a couple of really interesting books on this stuff. The Body Keeps the Score is something really interesting that I don't know if you've gotten into, but a lot of my research was around how the body holds trauma, right, and stress. And so the Body Keeps the Score really, that's Bessel van der Kolk is his name, but he talks a lot about how this cycle can only be replaced or replenished really by running or yoga. He did research around veterans who have gone through, multiple, I mean, that is a trauma experience in a lot of ways too. Heightened nervous system constantly, similar to service, I would say, in some level. But he talks a lot. He did a long study about yoga and the body and running, and how those are the things that can help those stress cycles get through. Also, Emily Nagoski wrote a really interesting book on burnout she talks about literally completing that cycle or stress cycle. We usually hit like the 3/4 of the stress cycle, and just those hormones just become stagnant. So, I mean, I don't know, like sometimes when I'm super stressed, I'll go like, go to the batting cage, go throw an egg against a tree, like go, I don't know, like there's like, play is something that's really helpful for me to kind of get away from getting caught in that stress cycle of like playing, sometimes like going, playing sports every once in a while, not often. But like moving my body, running, I guess for me is the most consistent way, but just like dancing in your room can literally even move you through those kind of cycles. It seems like it's, I have to start this whole new exercise regimen. No, really, that's not it. It's really just about just doing 10 jumping jacks. Sometimes between clients, that is what will help me too. Or like during service, going to the bathroom and like breathing really hard, or like shaking my body sometimes can help too, I don't know.
I love just the idea of going into your room and just dancing for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Also, like,
it's accessible, it's not something.
And just put on some music, and it's something, or sing to yourself or whatever, just something, especially when you're in like the confines of your home, find ways to get that energy out. I think might be a little challenging for some folks, but or go in the bathroom and just like live with yourself in the mirror for a second. So
it's really to like re-inhabit your body, that's how I like to
re-inhabit your body. I like that.
Yeah.
Because we're go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just thinking about being in a helping profession, right? Whether it's counseling, serving, bartending, whatever these things are, it's like you're serving, you're giving so much of yourself, and so much of that is trying to, it's kind of you leaving your body in order to help someone else, right? So we have to learn how to re-inhabit our bodies over time.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to transition now into depression.
Great.
We talked about coping with anxiety with, common in this industry is coping with anxiety with drinking.
Totally.
And there are definitely links between drinking and depression, which I would suspect has a lot to do with the high rates of depression within our industry, or at least is tied to them.
Sure.
If we're experiencing anxiety on a high level, and then we're always coping with alcohol, it's either going to contribute to feelings of depression, or also exacerbate them. But before I get too much into that, can you talk a little bit about like what depression is and what that looks like?
Yeah. Depression is a bit trickier on some level, I like to think, because there's a lot of biological things going on here too. Generational, depression, it's typically a mental health disorder characterized by persistently being in like a really dark mood, right? Loss of interest in activities, it's like your daily life having a hard time. Like, this is interesting. I'm thinking about like how all those things we just talked about that can help you cope with anxiety. When you're really depressed, I don't think any of those feel possible. It's kind of like those things feel really hard to do. it's hard to reach out for people. Connection feels hard, right? Cleaning up your room gets, this was so interesting. I started realizing over time, I think that, having a messy room is a really big sign of a low level depression, you know? Sometimes you can feel really close to tears, like you're kind of on the edge, not wanting to get out of bed, right? Smoking, drinking without feeling connected to your body. Because these are such pleasurable things, right? Drinking, enjoyment of a meal, like it's what we are in this industry to do in some ways, right? To provide pleasure. But it becomes a problem, I think, depression wise, when you stop enjoying, right? Yeah. Playfulness, pleasure, all these things kind of lose what they're meant to do. Because we're doing them to numb, you know, the isolation. I think isolation is interesting too, knowing the difference between solitude and loneliness.
Yes.
There's a lot there. I don't know. It feels like kind of trite and weird to try and define it. But
it is, because depression can be brought on by so many different avenues. Yes. It can be, chemical. It can be circumstantial. Yeah. Symptoms of depression can come in because you've experienced a tremendous loss, or, it can be something that comes and goes for people without warning, or like imbalances, or, so it's really hard to pinpoint what happens with people with depression, because it can come from so many different avenues. Furthermore, some people might have felt depressed for a long time, and it's just become their normal, and there's not an awareness that there can be more out of that. So that it becomes hard to ask for help if you don't know that you need help. And you said something about the messy room, and something that you and I talked about earlier this week was about how depression can manifest itself from from a diagnostic standpoint. And I don't really like getting into diagnostics in a conversation like this, but a symptom of depression is either gaining weight or losing weight. Can be gaining weight or losing weight. And this is where, and I talk about this quite a lot, like knowing yourself and knowing what, how your emotions manifest in you is really important, because, gaining weight or losing weight might be an indication of something. It might be triggering to other things that you're experiencing, like shame or guilt. And, and this is where it all starts getting really complex. But depression, I think you hit the nail on the head, is just that kind of that quiet or sometimes very loud gloom, in your life.
Deflation. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also you said with the isolation and solitude and loneliness being different things, I think a lot of folks are probably feeling that sort of, that
including
depression.
Me. Totally.
Because also I live alone, so there can't be physical touch. It's very hard right now. What are some ways you think within the current context that if people are feeling depressed, or starting kind of to feel depression set in, that they can do to intervene right now?
Yeah. I always like to think about depression also as this idea of grief, right? Like there's like the body and the mind grieving. So the last thing we typically want to do with that is pull people in. But I really think connection feels like, in the only ways we know we can right now, feels important, whether it just be kind of reaching out to a friend, or seeing, maybe reflecting on what is showing up for you, because sometimes the things that are showing up are it kind of feels like I never want to call something like this a treat, but it does kind of feel like a treat to kind of be able to sit with ourselves a little bit, we, especially as Western societies, I think, tend to build our lives around so many things and images and people. And so what is it like to just be with our body in the room, Where am I feeling sad? Where in my body am I noticing it? Right. Like I think even just laying on the ground, I'm in Austin now, so it's beautiful weather. In Chicago, obviously it snowed yesterday, I heard, so you cannot do this, but just laying on the ground. You're back? Okay, great. Good. I know, I just got back from Mexico a few weeks ago, and I'm like, oh my gosh, where is that? ocean, but I'm like laying in the grass here and I'm just like, okay, you know what? The ground, I can like ground my body as much as possible. What books do I like? What do I like watching? Who do I like to talk to? What do I feel after I watch those things? You know, just kind of connecting. I know depression can feel like you really don't want to connect with your body or yourself at all. It can be like a self-hatred, but it might be a really good time to start reflecting too on your story. Writing, I find to be so helpful. And just kind of morning pages is something that the Artist Way, Julia, I'm not going to say her name because I forget her name, but she does this thing called a morning dump where she recommends this at least for people to kind of, as soon as you get up, before you do anything, have a journal by your bed and write 3 pages every single day and just kind of dump what's going on in your brain on paper. And that can be really helpful, I've found in the past. In the morning, because I mean, it's kind of like, it's not for anyone, you know, so you kind of just really have to take the shame away and be like, okay, I don't care what I'm writing, but just kind of what's in your brain, you know. Sometimes I'll just take essential oils and if you put one peppermint and lavender, one in one nostril, one in the other, and that can activate both of your brain hemispheres. And so there's actual research around that kind of stuff. I know it sounds little, but that can really help me. I'm trying to think. I light a candle on certain days when I'm feeling certain things. I think there's a lot of intention. You just have to, I think I'm finding a lot of groundedness in ritual and intention right now.
100%. I think like ritual and structure. It's like when I used to be a kids therapist and the kids never wanted any rules, but kids thrive in rules. They're just really testing the boundaries of what the rules are, because people thrive with boundaries. They thrive with structure. And in a time like this, when there isn't a lot of structure at all, you know, I think the impulse is to really test boundaries within structure and ritual. But finding a way to develop that is really helpful. Something that I think about, you know, and recommend to friends and folks is like, think about when you feel the best. What is happening when you feel the best? Like, what does your day structure look like? Like, I feel the best when I'm up early and I do something and I make my own coffee and, you know, this, and this, you know, and I can make a whole list and activating that, writing that down and making that a reality, and then making a conscious effort to say, if I don't achieve all these things, that's fine though.
Exactly.
You know, that's a way to take a little bit of control back and, you know, to try to replicate those rituals, like you said, that you feel the best within.
Totally.
In terms of something like depression though, that can be quite insidious.
I know. I'm realizing that as we're talking about that. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's there's also
so hard to access.
I also want to take a little second to talk about when people should start seeking help.
Yeah.
Because my general thing with folks seeking help on depression is you don't want to ever wait. You know, it's with any sort of mental health issue that you're encountering.
Yeah, I think it does tend to get worse over time too. The more we that becomes our normal. It's again, that feedback loop, right? Where you don't want your normal to change. If you know that you're not enjoying things that you used to enjoy for more than a couple months, you know that you're probably not just in a season of grief, right? I mean, I think depression maybe is always a season of grief, but sometimes we're a little bit more vulnerable to it than others. And I think this season kind of it's going to be pretty easy to tell if we're more vulnerable than other seasons in order to need to reach out, right? Because things are a little bit closer to the surface right now, or are coming up, you know. I think if there's any feeling of self-harm, whether that even is like around wanting to harm yourself by overindulging with alcohol, food. I mean, food is one that we miss a lot. We just, especially in the industry, I feel like it's like, you know, we don't connect to our bodies as much, or ask our bodies what we're craving, what we're needing. Our bodies will tell us. Our bodies are wise. I mean, that's why anxiety and depression are a thing. They're trying to tell us, hey, something's up. And it's I know there's so much stigma around mental health that I think it's becoming a little bit more accepted over time. But I think that the self-harm piece feels important if there is something being experienced around those mindsets of like, I wish I just wasn't here, or like, would even anyone know if I wasn't, or what, do I even matter? Those are like big feelings that would be really probably helpful to talk through with someone. Because I mean, I think there's a level of us all experiencing those at certain times in our life, and it's super normal. It's sad, it's deep sadness, and there's probably reason you're feeling them. So, if there's something to kind of stand on, I think there's reason for those feelings. So there's ways to get help. There's resources,
Yeah. And I encourage people to, seek some sort of, professional help if they can, if they have the resources.
Yeah.
Even when things are good, because if you can understand what
for sure
what good is and what is really contributing in your life to make that good, and the structure that you're in, or whatever that looks like, having somebody with you to help understand what is happening, so that when things aren't as great and that gloom sort of does set in, you can really see and pinpoint oh, I see how I'm starting to set into this. Let's intervene early so that I can come out of it. There's a question here that I want to address. It says, you spoke to the difference between general anxiety that impedes on people's daily function and anxiety that is more incident-based. Can you do the same and create the distinction around depression? It's a great question. I'm thinking with that, is more the round of if you can pinpoint an event or something that happened, that there is a before and an after. Like, before I was feeling pretty dope, and then this happened, and then after I wasn't. That's what more incident based, having a hard time adjusting to something would be a depression that's brought on by that. Other examples of that would be seasonal depression. Is there's something that happens, that changes, that turns into that. Premenstrual depression is another one. That there's a before and an after. It's not something rather that's sort of within your physical and chemical experience. Is that what you're asking? Did I answer it? To go into the chat. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was great. I mean, I think it is the specific difference between having an event that happens. Yeah. Typically, I mean, of course it's normal to feel sad after a death of a family or friend. Of course it feels sad. I mean, there's multiple layers of this, right? But I think diagnostically, I forget, Laura, you'll have to help me on this. I forget exactly, but I think it's longer than 6 months or something. They say, again, I hate staying within diagnostic stuff, but there's not, I mean, it's kind of internal. And I think if you can kind of reflect, I think you kind of sometimes know if it's a feeling that you've had for a really long time, or if it's something. I think that's where it's kind of okay, you check in with yourself. We have to get us to ourselves to a point, I think, that we can feel confident and say something's off. This isn't me. I don't feel myself. And that's something we kind of have to relate to.
Yeah. And it's, part of me when we started talking about the 6 months, because diagnostically, that's a solid cutoff, if you will. It's that's from either something that's acute to more severe, chronic, or kind of more persistent. Is 6 month is kind of where clinicians live with that. But at the same time, just what you said, if you feel like something's off, it's never too early or even, too late to come in and start addressing what that off might be. So there's another.
Yeah, because even as a therapist.
Please go ahead.
Because even as a therapist, it's we have, our goal is to kind of turn people towards themselves more. The help is not necessarily internal or external. I don't have answers for you about your own state of health, right? I have clients all the time who come asking about, well, I want you to help me do this. And it's like, okay, you're giving me permission to
Mhm.
ask you the hard questions. And, so because I think we all do have these inner resources that sometimes we don't realize. And we just need help navigating them because oftentimes we weren't brought up to navigate them well.
For sure.
So that's really, I think therapy, while you're in a good state, can be helpful in those realms. Because even if that's the hard part about therapy being stigmatized, is that if you're only looking for help when things are really, really bad,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get to even know those tools.
Yeah.
Often. So, that's one thing my clients always will tell me too. Like, I can't believe I didn't do this earlier. And that's kind of a fun remark to stand on because it makes me think that, we do have these tools within ourselves. Mm-hmm. You find your own strength, and that is a really gorgeous thing. But
yeah. So there's one more question,
cool.
And I know that we're a little bit over, folks. So thank you so much for sticking with us. I want to make sure that we're doing these topics justice and addressing them thoroughly, and that you all feel, solid and not too vulnerable leaving this, webisode. Webinar.
You got it.
But the question is, would you say the industry encourages us to hold on to that stress and anxiety in order to perform? Yes. What would you say to people who feel that holding on to that anxiety is pulling depression up to the surface in them? That's pretty big. And I do think that there is an expectation to perform over our feelings, though I hope to see that changing soon. I think it's a part of, I think we need to shift how we're doing our service training so that it's not like you're on stage, put on a show, smiles always. I think part of authentic service is authentically acknowledging what that interpersonal relationship between the guest and the, a hospitality professional is. So I'm not really a fan of just like squashing it down and faking it till you make it. I think that there is a middle ground that we can live within and live in an emotionally authentic way, because it's a job. It's not okay to compromise our emotional well-being, for that job. So I think that there needs to be a shift with that, so that service training has, mental health and authenticity in mind over putting on a show. In terms of what would you say to people who feel that holding on to that anxiety is pulling depression up to the surface from them? I think if you hold down anything and you keep pushing it down more and more, eventually it's going to do this. And it's going to be pressing up, it's not going to go away. It needs to find its way out. And I don't know if you've ever been out drinking with somebody when it does find its way out after they've been drinking quite a lot, an explosive bit, that's what comes, that's what happens a lot, because it's not going to just disappear. Do you want to add to that a little bit?
Yeah. There's a comment that just popped up that makes so much sense. I mean, gosh. Yeah, I think it's hard for us because our industry is dynamic and we're changing faces and paces and responding to people's moods and behaviors every few moments. We're told to check our own shit at the door and compartmentalize ours in order to excel at our hospitality. It's the exact opposite of what you guys are talking about regarding to checking with your bodies and minds and emotions.
Yep.
Totally. I mean, that's exactly the dilemma, right? We're in such a really tricky position here. And I think, again, this is more, to me, this feels like even more motivation to kind of know what you need and know how to communicate that to your managers. And if they can't handle you needing to get off the floor for like a breath, because sometimes it's like, okay, I'm like so anxious, I just got to get off the floor and take a breath. And people get back. I mean, you can get better by taking 5 minutes of just breathing. You can literally land into your body a bit more. And I know sometimes we don't have 5 minutes, but can it be 2 minutes? Can it be 3 minutes, right? So this is why we kind of have to know our bodies and our minds and what is a trigger for us and what isn't. I mean, it does feel like kind of a privileged thing to talk about, in that way of like knowing your triggers and taking time. But I think we really can land into ourselves, and good managers and good leaders, that's maybe like, okay, we start demanding that of people who are our bosses, right? Of like, we really it can't be a job where you just burn out on all the time. We know that the cost is too high. People's lives are too, it's no one's meant to live like that. And there's just some really cool, I think there are people in our service industry or the hospitality industry making moves in this direction, and it seems to be going really well. So I know that, yeah, that just feels important. Because we can't always trust people in leadership out for our best. And I think we just kind of have to know ourselves, know what we need, and know how to move towards our health and wellness, because they aren't doing that for people in the industry right now.
And I think,
often some are.
And I think the common theme that I've been finding as we've been doing this Healthy Poor series is, to know yourself. And now is the time. If there's ever a time, it's to, it's right now is to take the time to know yourself so that when we emerge from this, we are ready. We're going to have to end because we're already 15 minutes over, which if you're cool with it, I'm cool with it. I want to respect everybody's time. But I also want to make sure that we're addressing all of these topics quite thoroughly, at least as thoroughly as we can within this format. So as you all, oh my God, the mental health survey. Okay. So as you all move through the rest of your day, I encourage you to maybe put some of these things into practice, right? Some of these coping mechanisms that we talked about into practice. If you're feeling especially anxious right now, do something to get that anxiety out, and take a moment to see how you feel. Just take note of okay, I do feel better, or maybe I need a little bit more. Try to implement some of these things, and then maybe write down how they go. The Tails team did post the link again to resources that if you do need to call somebody right now or text somebody, there's a text line on there too, if you're not really into talking. If you want to just kind of start, talking something out with somebody. And at the top of the list, there are 3 links to find therapists if you want to start talking to a therapist too. Sliding scale, a lot of folks are doing really discounted rates right now for people because there is such a need. If you even have the inkling to start looking for a therapist, I encourage you. But before we go though, there is the healthypoor.org/survey. I just launched, after years of research, launched a mental health survey for the hospitality industry. If you are interested in taking that, I would love it. I'm trying to collect as many responses as I can. This helps me and other folk to understand what is happening within the hospitality industry, start to develop ways that we can intervene and hopefully help. Will certainly help what's happening within the industry, so that people are thriving instead of burning out. So take the survey. It's also in Spanish. Share it with everybody that you know. It's totally anonymous. The more information that I can collect, the better. So I want to just check in one more time with a poll to see how everybody's doing with their anxiety. I know this was kind of, might have been a lot, maybe. And I'm feeling pretty okay. Let's see, chat. But I certainly hope, cool, thank you, Dennis. I certainly hope this was helpful for all of you. And I hope that you stay well and safe and everything. So, and Kelly, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What a treat.
Yeah.
It
was wonderful. We will send out the list of resources that Kelly was talking about too, because that's going to be my new reading list. Pretty incredible. So thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy your day. Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Jessica. Cool. I don't know how to end this.